I want you to imagine for a moment that I want to start a windowsill herb garden above my kitchen sink looking out into the backyard. So I go to the store and I pick up those little seed packets that look like taco seasoning, and I go to Target and I get some little containers that are color coordinated to everything else that's going on in my kitchen. It's gonna look good, it's gonna work. I go and get some potting soil, and I gently and carefully and tenderly put soil into each of these cups and pat it down, and it all looks right and it feels right. And I know that the potting soil has lots of nutrients in there, and it's gonna do and be everything it's supposed to do and be as a windowsill herb garden. And so I take my seed packet and I shake it like it's Kool-Aid, not because I think I'm supposed to, but just because it's a habit. Whenever you have a packet, you shake it before you carefully tear the top off. And then you're standing a few feet away from the little pots in the windowsill, and you take your packet and you throw it all over the kitchen. You just chuck it and hope that some land in the little pots, right? Some, I'm sure, made it into the pots, and there's lots in my sink, and there's a ton on the floor, and my dog and my kids are eating the seeds, and eventually will be growing little jalapenos in their belly. All I wanted was some green onions and jalapeno and cilantro so that I could make salsa and guacamole. And what I have instead is a mess all over my kitchen and a story that I'm somewhat embarrassed by. Aside from the fact that I don't really have a green thumb, you could tell that that never happened, because who in their right mind would this happen to? Who plants seeds like that? Strangely, that's exactly what's going on in our gospel lesson for today. We have a parable, and it says a sower went out to waste some seed all over the place. It doesn't say waste, but if you get how planting things is supposed to work. Now, I'm not a farmer. I'm not really even a gardener, but I know how it's supposed to work. Then you read this parable, and it's a really weird parable. And the sower, who pretty much anybody reading the story can pick up on the idea that the sower is God, the sower ends up looking kind of foolish in this story, because who would do this with precious seed all over the place? Now, I want you to know that because it's a parable, it's actually supposed to be weird. It's supposed to turn something that we all know on its head in order to let us in on some kind of truth that can't really just be explained if you just try and say it. It's not going to do what it's supposed to do. A parable is supposed to make you think. It's supposed to make you pause, and it's supposed to make you wonder. Now, you might be thinking, well, if Jesus has something important to say, why doesn't he just say it? Why doesn't he come right out and talk plainly? And I want you to know that if you're thinking that, you're actually in really good company. The disciples were asking the same exact question. Jesus tells this parable about a sower, and right after he's done, the disciples say, Jesus, what's up with the parables? Like, why don't you just explain things? Why don't you just tell us plainly? And the way that Jesus responds to that question is actually kind of funny. He says, to you, it's been given to know the secrets of the kingdom of God, but to them, it hasn't. And that's why I talk in parables. Jesus says, look, you already know what's going on. You know who I am. You know what's going to happen. I've told you like 3 times by now. But some people don't. They don't know what's going on. They don't know what's going to happen. They don't know who I am. And this is my best shot at helping them to see what you see, helping them to know what you know. This is my best chance at reaching them. Talking like this in parables is, I know what I'm doing, and I'm doing what's best. Jesus can't just come right out and say, look, this is what God is up to. Either because the people that he's talking to wouldn't understand it, or because they're not really open to it. If Jesus says, listen up, I'm going to tell you what God is really like, because the people think that they already know what God is like, because there's people in his hearing that think that they speak for God, their ears are going to shut to that right away. Now, it's not like we can relate to this at all, right? Sometimes we have our minds made up already. Sometimes we're pretty sure that we know how things work, and we're pretty sure that we know what things mean. I mean, we all have our ideas of who the good guys and the bad guys are in the world around us, and we get pretty insistent that we know how to sort out what we hear. Somebody tells us a story and we already know where it's going to go, and we already know what it means, and we already know how it reinforces our understanding of the world around us and how it proves to us that we've been right all along. If somebody wants to tell us something and we don't want to hear it, usually we can muster the patience to let someone talk, but we don't really hear what they're saying. It's not going in our hearts. Our ears might be open, but there's a gate just inside them that's shut up tight. That's what Jesus was dealing with here. He tried to tell people something new, something that they didn't already know, something that they hadn't ever heard before. In fact, something that had been hidden since the time of Adam and Eve. Now, that doesn't mean that people didn't think they knew what he was going to tell them, but Jesus says they didn't really know what he was going to tell them. No one has really known since the time of Adam and Eve. What he wanted to tell them is what God is really like. He wanted to tell them how God really feels about us and how he really feels about the world that he made. He wanted to tell them what God really has in store, what he's trying to do in and with and through us. And he knew that if he just came out and said it, most of the people listening to him weren't really listening, and they weren't ready to hear. And they'd have closed their ears and their hearts and their minds before he even got halfway through. But Jesus tells the disciples, but I can talk about a farmer, and at least they'll hear me out. They'll at least want to know where I'm going with this weird story about a farmer who doesn't know that you're supposed to put the seeds where they go. Everyone will listen to a farming story, at least for a little while, and maybe, Jesus says, maybe I can get my point across without them even realizing that I'm challenging something that they think they already know. Parable is a Greek word. It's a compound word, two different words. Para means alongside of, and balo means to throw or to cast. So a parable is when you cast something next to something else. You throw it alongside. You set something next to something else. Colloquially, it means to take something unknown and to compare it to something that's familiar. And we do this all the time. It's an analogy. It's a metaphor. It's an allegory. In this parable, Jesus is taking something that everybody understands. Farming, planting seeds. The seed goes in the dirt, you water it, the sun hits it, and it grows. We all know that. And he's using this thing that's familiar to explain something that people don't really get, that they don't really know. So here's the parable. Jesus went out of a house and sat beside the sea, and great crowds gathered around him so that he had to get into a boat. And he sat down in a boat just offshore, using the beach as a natural amphitheater and the water to project his voice to everyone that was coming to listen. And the whole crowd was standing on the beach, and Jesus told them many things in parables, like this one. A sower went out to sow, and as he sowed, some of the seeds that he was throwing fell along a path, and the birds came and just ate them right up. Other seeds fell onto rocky ground where they didn't have a lot of soil, and immediately they sprang up. But since they didn't have depth of soil, when the sun rose, they were scorched and they withered. Since they had no root, they just dried up and fell apart. Other seeds fell among thorns, and so thorns grew up with the plants and choked them out. Other seeds fell on good soil and produced grain. Some of them miraculously produced 100-fold, 100 to 1, some 60 to 1, some 30 to 1. And then Jesus says, he who has ears, let him hear. Now, indulge me for a minute because I can't tell if you're doing it or not, but go like this. Okay. I assume you have ears, so have you heard? When you hear Jesus say something like this, what happens? What do you think about? What speaks to you when he tells a parable like this? Are you trying to find your place in it? Where do you find yourself in this story today? Are you the soil? As you hear this story, are you wondering if you are productive enough? Are you parsing through your life, identifying shallow places, rocky places, figuring out who in your life are the birds and what the thorns are that keep stealing your joy and your peace at every turn? If today we are the soil, if that's how we're reading this, then the question is, are we wasting most of what God is throwing our way? Maybe you're not the soil today. Maybe that's not what you heard. Maybe you feel like you're the seed today. You feel like you're being thrown all over the place and you're being spread way too thin. And sure, there's pieces of your life that are abundant and thriving, but when you take a step back, you realize it's only a fourth of where you've been planted. 75% of your efforts aren't getting the results that they should. If we're the seed in this story, then maybe the question is, are we being wasted in places where it looks like we're never really going to grow? If you heard this and you identified with the birds or the thorns or the rocks in someone else's yard, maybe we don't really need to talk about that this morning. When you hear a parable, it's hard not to put yourself in it. Try to read, where am I? How is this talking about me? And what can I learn about myself? Here's the big question when you're reading a parable like this, because I'm guessing that this isn't the first time you've heard the parable of the sower and the seed. The big question is, as you were hearing that, did you find yourself in the story in the same place as the last time you heard that story? Is it the same every time you hear it? Or does how you hear it and what it says about who you are and how you're doing, does that kind of depend on what else is going on in our lives? The truth is, you are, at times, all of these things. You're the rocks in someone's yard. You're the parking lot sometimes. You're the seed, you're the bird, you're the thorns. You're 100-fold harvest, you're a 30-fold harvest, and that's normal. That's normal. That's a part of it. There are 4 basic feelings in life. You know, there's lots of different words to describe how you feel, but 4 basic feelings. You either feel mad or sad or bad or glad. And feelings aren't moral. It's not wrong to feel one of those things. It's not better to feel one of those things than to feel another one of those things. You just feel what you feel. Your feelings happen to you. But a lot of times, how you feel, what's happening to you, and what you're going through, and maybe even just how much coffee you've had and whether or not you've eaten yet today, all of these things can affect how you hear a parable or how you hear when someone is trying to tell you something. All of these things can affect whether you're receptive to what God is trying to tell you, and all of these things can affect how you hear it and whether it sticks, whether or not it actually changes anything about your life. The truth is, no matter where you see yourself in this today, now it's important that you do see yourself in the story today, but no matter where you see yourself in the story today, that's not the point. The point of the story is not the birds or the thorns or the crop or the soil or even the seed. The point of the story is the sower. Jesus is trying to teach us something about the one that's sowing the seed. That's what he's trying to teach us about. And I want you to catch this. In the example of me with the windowsill herb garden, even in the parable itself, if you know anything about farming, you on the surface might come to the conclusion that the sower is foolish or wasteful or careless. But what Jesus is trying to explain is that God isn't foolish or wasteful or careless. He's generous and he's determined, because the harvest that he's after is worth it. There's this little section in the middle of this parable that the lectionary skips over, but I'm going to read it to you. The disciples came to Jesus immediately after he told this parable, and he said, "Why do you talk in parables?" And Jesus answered them, "To you it has been given to know the secrets of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it has not been given. For to the one who has, more will be given, and he will have an abundance. But from the one who doesn't have, even what he has will be taken away." Jesus is saying the ones who get it, they're only going to keep getting it more and more the more they hear it. The people that know who Jesus is, every interaction with them just convinces them more and more of what they already know. The ones that don't get it, repeating himself isn't going to help. The understanding that they have is going to have to be removed before they can understand what's really going on. Something they think that they know is true is going to have to be removed before they'll even be seeking the truth, because they think they already know. Does that make sense? Jesus says, this is why I speak to them in parables, because they think they see, but they're not even looking anymore. And hearing, they don't hear, nor do they understand. They've stopped listening because they think they already know. Indeed, their case is like the prophecy of Isaiah. Isaiah says, "I'm going to tell you, you will indeed hear, but you're never going to understand me. I'm going to show you, you will indeed see, but you're never going to perceive. For this people's heart has grown dull, and with their ears they can barely hear, and their eyes they have closed, lest they should see with their eyes and hear with their ears and understand with their heart. And if they did, and if they turned, I would heal them, says the Lord. But blessed are your eyes, for they see, and your ears, for they hear. For truly I say to you, many prophets, many righteous people longed to see what you see, and did not see it, and to hear what you hear, and did not hear it." A sower went out to sow some seed. The sower goes out to tell the whole world how he really feels about them. That's what's going on in this story. Jesus is saying, God is throwing me at the world so that people will see how I feel about the world. What is the seed? His love. His love in action, in the person, work, ministry, miracles of Jesus. God's love is what he's throwing all over the place. The word of the kingdom. What's the thing that's been hidden that everyone wants to know and understand? The thing that so many people think they already know. The thing that Jesus came to proclaim, to reveal, to make plain. He came and he had one message. No matter what you already know about God, no matter what you've been told or what you've been made to assume based on what people that say they know what God is like do and say and think and how they act, no matter what you think you know about who God is and what he's like, actually, Jesus says, I have the authority to tell you that actually God is your Father. That's who he is. That's what he's like. No matter what you think you know about yourself, no matter what people tell you that you are, no matter what you've been made to believe your value is in or your worth is in, actually, I have the authority to tell you, you are his beloved child. That's who you are. No matter what you've heard or what you think you know about what you're supposed to be doing, about how you're supposed to perform, about what you're supposed to achieve with the time that you've been given, actually, Jesus says, I have the authority to tell you that actually you are already loved. You're already accepted. You're already valued. No matter what you think your purpose is. No matter what you think the plan is for you, no matter what anyone else says about how you're supposed to live your life in this world, actually, God has an entire eternity laid out for you, and it's unfolding before you right now. Your purpose and your plan and the thing that God has given for you to do, you can live in it right now. You can walk in it right now. That's the message. That's the word of his kingdom. That's what he's generously throwing out all over the place. Now, some days you're distracted. You're not feeling your best. You're facing a particular struggle, and you might just stay in bed all day, and you're not even hearing, let alone listening. And that's a part of it. That's normal. That happens. But it doesn't stop him. Your mood doesn't change his. God doesn't act the way we act. My ways are not your ways, says the Lord. Now, you holding a bag of seed, you might see the birds and think, I better shoo them away, or I'm not throwing it out where they can get it. I'm going to go get a marshmallow gun and get rid of these birds before I waste any of this precious seed. You might see a path and think, I better not throw any there because nothing is going to happen if I do. That's a waste of my time and my resources. You might see the rocks in the ground and think, well, this isn't ready yet. I'm not going to do anything with this until I can clean it out and clear it up and get it prepared. But God's not like that. God's not worried about waste. He has more than enough of what he's pouring out. He's not concerned about running out. There's more where that came from. Here he is, just sowing abundantly all over the place, just throwing seed, telling you how much he loves you and how much he loves the people that you interact with too. Now, there's one thing about parables that's important to point out. This is a comparison. It's not a description. Jesus doesn't say the kingdom of God, your Christian life, is a sower and a field. He says it's like a sower and a field. And that's good news, because if you literally were soil, if that was really how you were supposed to understand yourself, then there's not anything you can do about what kind of soil you are. There's nothing you can do. If you wake up feeling like garbage, you're just kind of stuck for the day, and maybe tomorrow it'll be different. Or to zoom out a bunch, if you wake up one day and you look at your life and you realize, well, this is all I've ever been. It's just how I am. I can't change. I can't do anything about this. I'm rocky, or I'm thorny, or it's just who I am. I'm a bird. I just peck at people and there's nothing I can do about it. It's all I've ever been. If you look around your life and you think, I'm just done growing, there's no more to learn, and even if there was, I can't change. I can't do anything to make myself more receptive to the word that God is always speaking over me. If you think you're just the kind of person that you are, I want you to hear this morning that that's not the truth. It's just not true. The greatest power that you have, maybe the only power that you really have, you've been given the power to organize your life in such a way that you're available to him. I can't really tell you what that means for you, because it's so different for so many different kinds of people. But when are you available to him? When can he speak to you? When can you hear? And are you listening? I can't tell you what to do. I can just ask the question. Is there anything that you can do to clear away stones, to cut back thorns, to shoo out some birds? Is there anything that you can do so that your ears might be a little more open to the message that he's pouring out over your life all day, every day? Is there anything? And if so, do that. Because Jesus says when it hits, when it actually hits, when our ears aren't closed and our eyes aren't shut, when we don't think that we're done and we hear his message, Jesus says that's when we see with our eyes and hear with our ears and understand with our hearts, and we turn and he heals us. Once more, we'll change. Again, we'll grow, and another harvest will come. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May he make his face to shine on you and be gracious to you. May he look upon you with his favor and give you his peace. Go in that peace and serve the Lord. Thanks be to God.